Today we're going to start with a little bit of artwork, and I don't know if you realize, I'm a little embarrassed, but Linda is an artist. She dropped off a couple paintings this last week for me to look at, and she hasn't taken them yet. If you get a chance, take a look at them. They're really nice. It's just really, really neat paintings, and she's very talented. So I've had art on the mind this week, and I came across a painting by Rembrandt. This is in the Museum of Fine Art in Boston, if you ever want to see it in person. And I want to think about this painting a little bit. If we were art critics, we would talk about how the canvas in this picture is oversized. It's bigger than the painting itself should allow it. I don't know anything about art, so I don't know what that means. But what we're going to talk about is, what do you think is on the canvas? So in this painting, the artist in the studio, the artist is over on the side, looking at the canvas. What's on that canvas?
Perhaps the picture we're seeing.
Oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting thought.
Because it kind of looks like he's glancing over off in the direction of which we're looking at it.
Yeah.
So it's possible he could be looking in a mirror, and then taking a step forward to paint what he sees, and then double checking, taking a step back.
Interesting.
It's blank.
It's blank.
He's trying to figure out where to start.
Another possibility. Other thoughts?
It's finished, and he's admiring.
Mm-hmm. There's another possibility.
Beautiful.
He's pacing back and forth trying to find out what he should draw.
That's right. Maybe he's looking for something, trying to think through what to do. You know, I think there's all sorts of possibilities, and anything can go, but only certain things are going to fit for the sermon. So, this is where it's going to land. It's possible that the canvas is empty, trying to figure out what to paint. It's possible that he's halfway done, stepping back, trying to figure out, I like this, I don't like this. Or maybe it's done. Maybe he's stepping back and saying, what are the final few brushes that I need to do to finish this painting? The reason why this is significant is this is similar to our lives. Some of you are young, in which there's not much paint on the canvas at this point, and you're thinking, what am I going to do with my life? What am I going to do? Am I going to do a spring sport? Am I going to be involved in this activity? What am I going to do for a job? What am I going to do with my life? Not much paint on the canvas, and you're thinking, what's my life going to be about? Some of us are more midway through, in which there's some paint on there, and we're stepping back and saying, is this all there is? Is the painting that I have going on my canvas really what I'm looking to finish with? All those blank spots are left. What should I be doing there? And are there some touch-up things I should do with what's already there? Some here are more mature, in which are stepping back and looking at the painting that's been completed so far in life and saying, what am I going to do to leave the legacy that I hope to leave? What are those final touches? What are those things that I want to be doing in my life now to leave a legacy that when people look back and see the painting of my life, that it's something that's going to make a difference? Leaves us with the question of, why am I here? I want to clarify this. This is not a question of why are you here during the sermon. This is a bigger question than that. This is, why am I here? Why am I living this life? We're going to go back to Genesis 1 again, and it's still on page 1. Verses 26 through 31. Then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the air, and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Now, to get after this idea of why am I here, first I want us to think about repetition. There's a lot of repetition in these verses, and the importance of repetition, undoubtedly, we all think about Hall's theory, right? Remember this?
No,
Me either. I don't know why I have to come up with something like this. Pretty much all it says is, if you experience something time and time and time again, you're going to remember it. All right? That's where we land. I don't think that we're going to probably disagree with that. Okay? So SHR equals... So remember the formula, but I think we all agree repetition makes it so we remember things. Now, when I think of memory, I think of flashcards. I think about waiting for the bus, and my mother, multiplication tables. All right, 3 times 9, 8 times 4. And so I did a flashcard, I did a search of flashcard, and this is what I get now. Instant memory. Come on, that's not the equation. So, we all have the flashcard idea of how we memorize things, of learning the basics by hearing something over and over and over again. That's what we get in these verses. We get the basics reminded over and over again. And here's the first one. Man is created. That is said 3 times in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. Now this is important for us to understand kind of a worldview situation. There's 3 sort of worldviews that man is created kind of explains. First, has anyone ever seen the squirrel ear? They're all over Potter County. Okay, you have to be good with the camera. There is the view out there, the materialist view, that all that people are just animals pretty much. That we just respond to stimuli. We have genetics, we have environment, and we're just the product of however those things come together. That's about as realistic as a squirrel ear. There's more to us. We know from this story that God created us with purpose. That there are genetics that influence, there is environment that influences us tremendously. However, there's more to it than that God is directly involved in giving us purpose. We're created for a reason. The second view up here is that sort of mystical sort of thing of the hands. There's that spiritualist sort of idea that everyone has a piece of divine inside them. No. We're created in the image of God, the likeness of God, but we're not God. We're not little gods running around that all we have to do is bring that up from inside. No, we're created in the image of God. So that brings us to the Christian view here. The last one, you're going to love this. We are called to bear the image of God. We are image bearers. That took me all week. All right. We are image bearers. We are creatures. We need to be honest about the fact that our genetics influence, our environment influences. There's no doubt about that. But we bear an image that is not our own. It reminds us to be of tremendous value. That is something that our culture, I think, can kind of take away from us at times. To forget the fact that each person has tremendous value and potential. God created us in His likeness. That sounds like potential. At the same time, when there's potential, when there's value, there's also tremendous responsibility. I'll explain this a little bit. This is a story lifted from James Montgomery Boyce. There's a mother and a son. And the son does something bad. Say company is over, and they're sitting around the table, and he starts telling a story. And the story's a little iffy, and then he starts unloading some words that should not be shared at the table. And so the mother takes him aside and says, "What are you doing? You are being bad. You're a bad boy. You're making bad choices. How could you do this? This is so embarrassing." Right? The next day, the mother drops a bunch of dishes. They break, they shatter, and she shares similar words. And the son says, "Oh, you're saying the same thing?" And she said, "Oh no, well this is just because I'm so nervous. My nerves are getting the best of me. And it's just the pressures that are on me, and it's not my fault." Right? See how we forget about the fact that we have responsibility for our actions. It was fun to blame the little kid for making a bad choice. But when it's us, it's not our fault. We're not responsible. It's just because of how things happened. But God created us in His likeness so that we can make decisions. We have real value. That means we have true responsibility in what we decide to do or not do. Okay. So the first repetition was man is created. The next repetition is man is created in God's image. We're told this 4 times. We've already touched on it some because they're interrelated. I want to think about this a little bit. In Genesis chapter 5, verse 3, similar words are used. When Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image, and he named him Seth. Interesting how that wording is, likeness and image. We get the idea of Father, Son. We get the idea of it pointing back to our creation in which we should look like God. It's how we glorify God. Living our lives in a way that honors Him, we should be like Him. Okay. I think we're good. All right. Next thing. The Hebrew word for in the image of God gives the idea of that we are to be representatives of God, that we are to represent Him. In many ways, we are to be His vice-regent. I love that word, vice-regent. It sounds so important. The vice-regent was something that took place a lot in the olden days, when you had a king, and then he would send someone out who would act in his place. So if it was a big kingdom, he'd send somebody out to be in charge of a certain area. That'd be the vice-regent. And so they had the authority of the king, and they would be there. They weren't the king, but they had authority given by him. That's where we're at with creation. Notice all those words that God gave us there. We are to subdue it. We are to be dominion. Everything is given to us. We are to be stewards of what God has given us. It's laid out in which we are to use God's resources for our benefit. That's very clear. But we need to remember that He is the one who gave it to us. We need to steward those resources, realizing that He is the one that gave them. Now, we've heard those things before. There's one other piece that's really important. We are to steward community. If you think about God in Trinity, God is always in community. There are 3 in 1. Father, Son, Spirit. If we are to be like God, we should be in community with other people. We should be making a difference in other people's lives. That's what we're going to wrestle with some more as we keep going on. Who needs Aristotle? Okay. What I want to think about is back to this question of why am I here? We have this framework laid down that we're created in the image of God. We're we're creatures created by God, what's the point? Why are we here? And my answer is to flourish. When you think of flourish, I think we should think of thriving. We should think of becoming something great, like a lot better than what's expected. That's the picture that we get of creation here, isn't it? Most of us have had an idea of what happens in Genesis 1, right? What happens? God created the world, all right. That was close. All right, so there was nothing, and God created not only something, but this amazing stuff. And everything is thriving. It's this beautiful scene from dark and nasty and nothing, going to this flourishing idea. What if God created us to bring about flourishing? If God created us in which we honor and glorify Him by bringing about flourishing in our relationships with other people, in our friendships, and how we live our lives, what if we are called to flourish like that? Flourishing requires two things. It requires authority and vulnerability. We've talked about this some before, and I want to go through it again. I think it's a fascinating concept in which we are created vulnerable. That's the piece of we are creatures, right? We were in the Garden of Eden, so we're kind of protected. And if you think about when we're born as babies, that's vulnerable. Most other animals aren't quite so vulnerable. We are very vulnerable. We're also vulnerable to being image breakers. Whenever we have decisions to make in life, we can make a good decision or we can make a lousy decision. We're always at risk of doing something dumb. At the same time, we also have authority, that we are in the image of God. We have the capacity for meaningful action. We're to subdue, we're to have dominion. We are that vice-regent idea. All right, now, to explain this, a 2x2 chart is what provides all the answers. This is going to be good. Unfortunately, this isn't going to be artwork. You're going to be disappointed in that. However, great. X-axis, Y-axis, right? Do I have my X and Y? Math teacher says yes. Okay. The X-axis is authority. The Y-axis is vulnerability. Now, we're going to have 4 quadrants here. Alright, so it's not a real graph, but you get the idea. Authority is getting bigger, vulnerability is rising. In this top spot, when we live our lives and we are in a spot in which we have no authority, but lots of risk, lots of vulnerability, those are places of injustice. That's when life deals us a bad hand and it's not fair. It's hard to get out. In which something bad happens and we hardly have any chance to change it. In some ways, this is dealt to us, but we have a choice to make. We can become prisoners of this. We can decide that we are just victims of life and never try to move. In which we just throw up our hands and say, well, whatever happens in life, whatever happens. I can't change it, and we're stuck. Now, there's another spot here of low vulnerability, low authority, which sounds kind of appealing because it's safe, right? No risk, that's good. Maybe. This is the video game category. I'm not saying video games are all bad. I'm not preaching that you shouldn't do a video game, all right? But we shouldn't live here. We shouldn't live in a video game. Video games are great because you can do all sorts of decisions, all sorts of amazing things. It doesn't risk you anything other than your time. Authority-wise, you don't have to make any tough decisions. indeed, but how much flourishing does that bring? How much does it change life? How much time do we spend in the safe category? High authority, low vulnerability is idolatry. It's really appealing to have lots of authority to make decisions in which there's no risk. Oh, that's an awesome place to be, right? I mean, it seems so good. But that means that you're just getting your way. There's never any pushback because you're just doing what you want. If we think about this a little bit, if we have full authority over our day planner, maybe that's more important than God. If we have full authority over our dreams without consulting God, maybe we have an idol. Maybe if we are in full authority and have an idea of what our checkbook should say, or our goals of what our kids should do, in which that is such a high priority over God, it's an idol. So obviously that brings us to the good category. Of flourish. Flourishing comes about when we make decisions that matter, but we're willing to take risk. Two by twos are cool, but they don't tell a story. And I want to tell a story about flourishing. Has anyone ever heard the name Lois Finette Baker Cornell? Probably not. She'd be over 100 now. She's my grandmother. She passed away 15 years ago. Something interesting about my grandmother, she was always a nice lady, really nice. Many of the years that I knew her, age had taken its toll, and she suffered with Alzheimer's. And by the end, the painting of life that she'd been painting was kind of like in a dim room. I couldn't really see it. I didn't know what had happened in her life. I knew different stories, but I didn't know it. And then at her funeral, it was like a spotlight was put on her canvas. People would stand up and say, Lois was my Sunday school teacher. I stopped coming because I just didn't feel like it. And she called my mother and said, I'm going to come and pick up your son, your daughter, and bring them. That changed my life. Another person would stand up and say, you know, Lois sent me a letter year after year to encourage me. Even though I didn't necessarily send anything back, she would send something to encourage me, and it made all the difference to me. And to hear story after story of how she took risk, and in different places in life where she could make a decision that mattered. She invested in people. Got me thinking about how she invested in my life. Someone who was the full definition of frugal, but would be overly generous with myself and people of my generation. I would think of someone who would always take time to play a game, no matter what was going on. Someone who truly cared about us. My grandmother did not have positions of great authority. She was a school teacher in a one-room schoolhouse. She was a homemaker for much of her life. But boy, did she bring about flourishing. When I think about that painting of her life, and I can still see pictures in my mind of different people who would stand up, people I didn't know that my grandmother would ever cross paths with. How she changed lives because she cared. Because she was willing to take risk. She's willing to make decisions. Each one of us have a canvas that we're working on. I hope this morning that as we step back and look at that canvas, whether it's mostly empty, half full, a lot full, we truly think through the next strokes that we're going to do. What's the legacy that we're looking to leave? What's a legacy of flourishing, in which we bring about something great, in which other people around us can thrive?